Hey guys, what's going on? So following week 5, I just wanted to give my top 10 teams in the NFL right now. So starting at 10 with the Dallas Cowboys, I thought they had a really great last minute win against the Steelers on Monday night. And this of course put them in the 3-2 category. And it's looking like we're going to have a pretty competitive NFC East, but I easily could see the Cowboys being the clear wild card favorite this year if they're able to keep this up. And I think for the Cowboys, while you usually do have a pretty dominant defense, I wouldn't say we've gotten that level of performance this year, but still a fairly good defense and a really electric offense as always. Really, the passing game has been pretty strong this year. I think they're still trying to figure out exactly who their running back will be. I think now it's looking like Dowdle will be the favorite, but second in passing yards this year. So I really think that speaks to Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb as well as Tolbert. So I think you're likely going to see the Cowboys in the playoffs again. And then I would have the Denver Broncos just above them. I think their 3-game win streak has been really impressive. Pretty slow start to the season, losing to the Seahawks and the Steelers. But I really think Bo Nix has found his rhythm. And I think what's really remarkable about the Denver Broncos is that they have a really unstoppable defense this year. You have second least in total points allowed per game. And in several categories for their defense in terms of stats, you have the Broncos in either the top 3 or the top 5 of the NFL. So I think they're going to be a good all-around team this year. And I think in terms of the AFC West, while the Chargers were maybe a little bit of the clear favorite for a wild card or number 2 spot here, I think the Broncos clearly have that. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how they do against the Chiefs this year. So I'm really looking forward to hopefully the Broncos eyeing a wild card spot for the playoffs as well. And then at 8, I would have the Green Bay Packers. You have the opening season loss to the Eagles, but it was a pretty close game. And then I think they found a lot of their rhythm, even without Andrew Luck. So I think that even speaks to the depth that they have on their team. And then the Vikings loss, I really think you have to take with a grain of salt since they're so dominant this year, but able to do a lot of things right. And I think the Packers, along with the NFC North, is going to be one of those really competitive divisions. And I likely think we could even get 3 teams here going to the playoffs. But they're going to have to fight for a wild card spot. And in terms of some key stats, you have them being 3rd in rushing yards. And I think in terms of passing, you have a pretty good selection of receivers. And they're probably also in the top 10 range in terms of other offensive stats. But I would have the Atlanta Falcons just above them. I think something that can't really be measured as well in stats, you do have the Atlanta Falcons winning 3 games in the last minute or last half of the 4th quarter. So I think the Falcons, if they're able to get into the playoffs, are going to be a really tough team to beat just because they can crank out those nail biters. And I think it's going to be a lot of back and forth between them and the Buccaneers, but now you got to put them in first since they just beat them. So I think the Falcons easily could win first place. And I think looking how the Saints are playing more recently, the Falcons are going to be a probably wild card team, if not first in the division. And I think the running game hasn't been as impressive as expected, but pretty good passing performance, pretty good outlook for Kirk Cousins. You have them being 5th overall in completions per game. And I think the opening loss against the Steelers and the Chiefs, since they are pretty tough teams, I don't really think that's too much to worry about. And I think they do have some impressive wins, notably the Eagles and the Buccaneers and even the Saints, even though they've kind of fallen off a little bit there. And then at number 6, I have the Baltimore Ravens. Also have really turned it on in the past 3 games, going on a win streak. You have the opening to the Chiefs, which did turn out to be a pretty close game there. And then the loss against the Raiders, I think, is really rare. But the Ravens are just looking extremely electric, especially holding on against the Cowboys. But the Bills game was just a total blowout. And then the Bengals game, it looked like the Bengals were just going to outscore them, but the Ravens were able to hold on. And I think what really speaks to the Ravens is you have Derrick Henry really coming alive, and you have the Ravens overall being 1st in rushing yards. You also have Derrick Henry being 1st in rushing yards. You have the Ravens now being 1st in overall yards in addition to touchdowns. So I think their offense is just really coming alive. And I think even for a pretty dominant defense that you have had in the past, I don't really think you're seeing that this year. But maybe in more games to come, you'll get a more devastating defensive performance. We saw more of that with the Bills, but I'd like to see them really play up to their defensive potential, but really going to be a scary team. And I think they obviously have the AFC North again this year, and I think it's really only uphill for the Ravens. And then at 5, you do have the bye week this week, so it's a little bit harder to gauge where they're at in comparison to everyone else, but I really like how the Lions are playing. You do have the close game loss to the Buccaneers, but 3 good games from them. I would like to see them also play a little bit harder overall competition, but I think for the Lions, you really do have so many options for their offense. You have their dual running game, but you have their passing being really excellent this year. You have them being 3rd in overall yards, so I really think that speaks to both the passing and running game. You have Goff in his last game against the Seahawks not throwing a dropped pass, and you have Williams really coming alive to add some depth to their receivers, and I think their defense is even better than it was last year, especially Hutchinson being probably one of the best defensive linemen in the NFL. And I think for the NFC North, the Lions and the Vikings are going to be the games to watch, because I really could see that either way, but I see both of those teams being obviously in the playoffs this year. And then at 4, I do have the Washington Commanders. I think they're really one of the most surprising teams of this year, and I think Jaden Daniels, along with the other rookie quarterbacks, all of them having winning records, and I'd say Jaden Daniels leads the pack. Did start the season to a loss against the Buccaneers, but the 4-game win streak they've been on has been pretty impressive. I would like to see them play against a little bit harder competition. We're obviously going to get that with the Cowboys and the Eagles, but you have them first in terms of total points scored. And I really think it would be great for the Commanders to win first place this year and even go far in the playoffs. But at 3, I do have the Houston Texans just above them. Again, I think you really got to take the loss to the Vikings with a grain of salt. But you do have a good strand of wins. I think the most impressive would be against the Bills last week. And I think what really speaks out for the Texans is that dominant offense, is all of those offensive weapons. You have them first in terms of passing yards, and I definitely think that's something that's going to continue for them. And I think they are the clear favorite to win the AFC South and be a dominant playoff team this year. But going into those undefeated teams, I do have the Chiefs at a close second. And I think for the Chiefs, you really don't have too much of an impressive performance in terms of statistics for their offense, even though we do know that the Chiefs do have a good offense and a good combination between Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. But you just don't have the stats to show for it yet. I think if anything, you have a pretty good defensive performance from the Chiefs. You have them being the 3rd best rushing defense. But really, stats aside, you can't complain with what the Chiefs have done. They do find ways to win, and they have beaten a fair share of tough teams this year. And I do think they are the clear favorite for the AFC West. I do think they're going to be a really tough team to beat in the playoffs, just given their Super Bowl runs. And I think what's even more remarkable for the Chiefs is playing through a lot of injuries. You have Pacheco and now Rashee Rice, which were really the heart of their offense, but the Chiefs are still finding ways to win, so I really think that speaks to their program. But you do got to hand it to the Minnesota Vikings. I think they've been the most shocking team in the NFL by far, and I think on both sides of the ball you have really impressive performances, but I do think you got to hand it to their defense. First in interceptions, second in stats. But I think on both sides of the ball, you'll find them in the top 10 rankings for the NFL this year. But not a bad offense by any means either. I'm really excited to see what Sam Darnold has done there, in addition to their dual running backs with Chandler and Jones. And then with Jefferson, I really think they have a lot of deep threats, but really just so many good players on the Vikings, and just a really great job from their coaching staff. So that would be my top 10 power rankings for the NFL so far. Feel free to let me know your thoughts on this. Really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you later.